Welcome back to the Blue Chip Breakdown, Vols fans. I'm your host, Bull. It's time for our Day 10 of Fall Camp news, notes, and thoughts. As always, please make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Before we get into the injury report, let's talk about this preseason AP poll that just dropped. Our Volunteers are sitting at number 15, sandwiched between Clemson at 14 and Oklahoma at 16. The top 10 has 4 SEC teams, 4 Big Ten teams. It's going to be 1 from the ACC, which is Florida State, and then we have Notre Dame. So I think that's pretty telling about what they want to do just as far as, how the college football playoff is going to be shaping up at the end of the season. Now, I do think that our Vols will move up these rankings pretty quickly just because some teams in front of us are going to be losing. So I would say heading into the NC State week, we'll probably be on the verge of breaking that top 10, if not in the top 10. And then coming out of that week, I think that we should be pretty solid in the top 10. So how do we respond to being a highly ranked team for most of the year? That's going to be a big question. Now, in 2022, we went down to Athens, ranked number 1, and we lost that game. We didn't handle it right, but I think that we've learned from those mistakes. So this team is a lot more mature, and I think that they will handle it better. I just kind of feel like these are guys that do kind of work, to have a chip on their shoulder to kind of prove people wrong. But I also feel like they'll have that confidence knowing, hey, look, we're starting to get this buzz, and we want to prove people right. So let's go ahead and take a look at the injury report. And this list, this looks so much better than it did in the previous video, but we still have a few players that are limited. Again, limited just means that they are getting a limited amount of reps out in practice. It does not mean that they're injured. The only player that is injured is going to be down at the bottom, Jordan Thomas. Now, we have Cam Seldon, Ricky Gibson, more on him in just a second, William Wright, Jordan Burns, and Dylan Sampson. So starting off with Dylan Sampson, it does sound like he was fully dressed out there participating some. Not quite sure what he's dealing with, but it doesn't sound like it's major by any means. Extremely, extremely minor. But we're going to be very careful with him because he's, the most veteran running back inside of that room. We need him for week 1. We really need him more for week 2. I would say, man, look, let him sit out versus UT Chattanooga 2. Let's start to build some depth. But that's how that's looking. It sounds like all signs are pointing in the right direction for Dylan Sampson. Now on up to Ricky Gibson. It sounds like he's dealing with some sort of a hamstring issue. Again, it's not going to be serious, but whatever it is, playing at the cornerback, probably going to be our starter, or at least one of our starters at that position. That's something that could end up being, a lingering issue for him. So I would like to see him sit out as long as possible. Now, obviously, we've got a great staff, like we've got a great medical team that will monitor that and be on top of it. Obviously, we're going to, defer to whatever they think. But I kind of feel like if he's dealing with anything at all, just like let him sit out. He could actually, in my opinion, maybe sit out for the rest of fall camp just because he's gotten enough reps. It hasn't been a ton, but he did play some for us last season. Obviously, all of spring, and then all of fall camp up to this point. But it could be good for him to get some of those mental reps as well. That could be more beneficial for a younger player that's already gotten enough physical reps. Maybe he will step his game up from a mental perspective. Not that he necessarily needs to, but I'm just, kind of throwing a little caveat into this whole situation. So hopefully he is going to be fine. And we will see what happens on our next practice. Will he be participating a little bit more? I don't know if he did too much of anything. It does sound like he was moving around, maybe kind of working off to the side, not going through the regular team reps. But as long as he's still moving around, that just means that he's kind of going through some sort of a rehab where, again, it's not an injury. We're just working to get him stronger for week 1. Now for the media, we heard from Coach Willie Martinez, who is the cornerbacks coach. Really, he's the secondary coach. We also heard from Will Brooks, Christian Charles, and Jamal McCoy. So starting off with Coach Martinez, sounds like he loves that room. It's been a common theme really with all the coaches that we've heard from throughout all fall camp. I mean, very, very deep. He talked about the versatility, especially at the star position. So right there, it sounds like Christian Harrison and Boo Carter are going to be fighting to see who the starter will be. In my opinion, it's probably going to be Christian Harrison by week 1 or, in week 1. And we'll work Boo Carter in there some just because Coach Martinez likes to play the veterans. And I would have to anticipate that Christian Harrison is going to know what to do on a higher level than Boo Carter, just because Boo Carter is a true freshman. I could be wrong on that. I don't know that for sure. I'm just, kind of speculating with that. But I think that that's how it's going to go. And then in week 2, I would anticipate that as long as Christian Harrison is healthy and he's playing well, that he will get most of the reps versus NC State. But you still want to kind of work Boo Carter in there some as well. And Coach Martinez also touched on guys like Will Brooks being able to play at the star position and Andre Turrentine. So very versatile. I think that there's a lot more bodies that he didn't touch on. He did say, listen, we know in the back of our mind that we've got a lot of people who can play at this position. So that's about what we had kind of thought once Jordan Thomas went down. Now, just as far as the rest of his team, he did say some really good things about Will Brooks, him being a leader, kind of knowing what to do, being a coach out there on the field. He said, look, we got guys inside of this room that can kind of get to some players that are making mistakes before I can. And you love that because what it tells you is that they're holding themselves accountable, that they are taking ownership of their room, and that they want to succeed as badly as the coaching staff does. So that's really big. I think that that goes such a long way, in football in general, but I think especially on this level, sometimes it's about those little small things. But I was very, encouraged and happy to hear him saying those things, especially about Will Brooks. He also kind of touched on, just playing on special teams. Most of these guys inside of that room, some of those younger players will be working on special teams first. But he said, hey, I can get a good idea of how you can play on defense by how you play out on special teams, because you're out in the open field. You have to do that open field tackling. Sometimes it's probably more difficult to do that on special teams, especially with kickoff, than it is just kind of, lining up and playing football on defense. He also said some good things about Jordan Matthews. He said, man, he's a big guy and he's been very consistent here. That's been that was a key kind of like phrase for him, talking about really everyone. He said, man, look, there's a lot of guys in here that just come to work. They're very consistent, and they're focusing on those small details. Now, he also kind of highlighted Boo Carter. I was I was happy to see his reaction in being asked about Boo. You can tell that Boo is the real deal. He said, man, he's just really doggone good. And Coach Martinez also said that this is one of the best secondary rooms that he has ever coached. He's been coaching the secondary for a very, very long time. So I think that that's high praise, and we should feel good about this secondary room. I'll say this just really quickly, because some people I've seen on social media and in some different places are kind of down on the secondary. They're a little bit afraid of what we're going to put out there. I think that we're fine, especially at corner. Our cornerbacks are going to be two of the best that we've had in a long time. And P and I have been saying that on this channel for a long time. I feel like once we got Jamal McCoy, we said, man, listen, we got two shutdown guys now with Ricky Gibson. And I think that our safeties are going to be just fine, because they're a lot more athletic than we were last season. Now, of course, last year we had more veterans. So is this going to be about, can we pick up the playbook? Everything that I've seen from, these player lounge videos, to just listen to these guys in some regular media types of interviews, things like that, you can tell that they want to get better, that they're doing everything that they can to pick up that playbook and to know where to be in certain situations, and that they are going to play hard. We've already talked about the star position. A lot of people can kind of play that. We have a lot of different bodies, but I love the upside really everywhere. And I trust pretty much everyone that I feel like the staff is going to be throwing out there. So please do not be concerned about the secondary. I think we're going to be just fine. Now, let's start off with Jamal McCoy, because as we had just touched on with the cornerbacks standing on top of the routes, he even spoke about that, just kind of coming out of the first scrimmage. He said, man, look, I think that the defense played great. I think that the secondary played really well. We didn't give up any deep passes. We stayed on top of the routes. So that's really big. And he also talks about just the transition of, coming from Oregon State to Tennessee, and then in his second season, how the game is slowing down for him. That's huge, because, I mean, man, SEC ball is played at such a fast pace, but once it starts to slow down and you can kind of do things like he had talked about between him and Nico, where he said, all right, look, I know that Nico's going to be reading my eyes. So I learned that I had to bait him some and make it look like I'm doing something that I'm not. And he also feels like he's pushing Nico by, doing the exact same thing, vice versa. So they're making each other better. But that just kind of goes back to what happens when the game slows down. You start to get into those little individual chess matches, and that's when you go from being good to great. I think that Jamal McCoy is going to have a great season for us this year. Now let's move on to Will Brooks. He said some great things, just talking about being a leader inside of that room. Actually, Jamal McCoy talking about his transition from Oregon State to Tennessee. He said, look, Will Brooks is a guy that I lean on. We're going to get to Christian Charles here in just a second, but he said the exact same thing. So just hearing him, hearing Will Brooks talking about, yeah, I know that I'm a leader out there and I want to make sure that guys are getting it right. Also talking about, just coming in and taking advantage of his opportunities, because he did start off as a walk-on. At this point, he probably has a scholarship. I'm sure that he's earned it. But, he just talked about, look, whenever I get my opportunities, I'm not thinking, hey, if I play well here, I'm going to be starting. And if I don't play well on this rep, then I'm never going to get to play. Just taking it one rep at a time. So you love that veteran approach from a guy like Will Brooks. And he said, listen, I've been working mostly at safety in this fall camp, but I can also play star. I can play anywhere inside of that secondary. So I feel great about him. I feel a lot more confident maybe than I did earlier. And P and I were just kind of breaking down some film of the Georgia game last night, and we were saying, man, yeah, Will Brooks looked really good here, especially in run support. I think that if you put him at the star position, which what he played versus Georgia, he's going to be almost like a linebacker for you. I think that he fits well versus UGA, because primarily they're going to work the middle of the field with, some bigger tight ends, things like that, which I feel like Will Brooks can cover. And again, back to the run support. I mean, he looked great, just kind of, stopping blocks, like not getting moved off the spot. So he's really good in that aspect. My biggest concern for him is, can he cover some of these faster wide receivers down the field? But I feel confident just because he is a savvy veteran. And sometimes, man, that, veteran knowledge, that savviness can help you, especially playing at the star position. So now let's talk about Christian Charles. It sounds like he's doing a good job of adjusting coming off of his injury. Probably been getting some more mental reps, things like that, which is always good, I think, for any of these players. But he's going to be a guy that knows what to do. And he said that he has primarily been working at safety. But as we've talked about, he could probably play at the star position. And he actually came up on campus playing at the cornerback position. So he's just another one that's very versatile and can play anywhere inside of that room. Now, they asked him a lot of questions about some other players. Will Brooks was one. He said that Will Brooks is a guy that even he goes to get some questions answered. And he said Will Brooks even knows what the defensive line is doing on stunts and things like that. So that's huge just to hear that, again, we've got some veteran leaders on this team. He was also asked about Jamal McCoy. He said, man, he's very explosive. And you could just tell that he's a guy that Christian Charles feels like could be very special inside of that cornerbacks room. And he was also asked about Boo Carter, and he said, yeah, Boo Carter's been playing well. He was asked about Christian Harrison, and he said that Christian Harrison has been showing some more consistency. So I am looking for Christian Charles to be a guy that plays some this season. Now, we're hoping that he can stay healthy, but all that versatility, I mean, I think that he's a very key piece. He's almost like a Dane Davis in the secondary that, hey, man, if you have like a little hole here inside of the boat, you plug it up with Christian Charles, again, as long as he's healthy. But, I just love his game. I think he's been looking really, really good. You can tell that he's playing with a high level of confidence right now. So let's go ahead and jump into what we saw today at practice and some of the news and notes that we got from the insiders. We'll start off with the offensive line. My biggest takeaway from the insiders was that Jackson Lampley has been getting the bulk of the reps at the left guard spot. Now, we talked about this, I believe, in the previous video, just talking about practice, that if I was the coach, I would have Jackson Lampley getting more reps just because Andre Carrick is always banged up. But outside of that, I think that Andre Carrick looked really good. I think that Jackson Lampley looked really good. Really, the entire offensive line as a whole, they played with a whole lot of pop, a whole lot of burst. And I think that that could be because maybe they didn't perform as well as they wanted to in that scrimmage, so maybe they're coming out with their hair on fire. But that is my biggest takeaway with them. Expect for them, like we always say, to have a really big year. Now let's talk about the linebackers, because there's a couple of takeaways here. Really, the biggest one is just going to be with Arion Carter. We talk about him every single day, but he is so explosive in everything that he does, whether he's kind of getting off blocks and, just wrapping up things. I mean, everything that he does is explosive. I think that he is going to have an absolutely ridiculous year this season. We need for him to stay healthy. He's another one that I might try to wrap up in some, bubble wrap or whatever, but it just seems like he's chomping at the bit to go out there and hit something, man. He's got a ton of energy and he's keeping guys fired up. But outside of that, man, I think that we look really good inside of that room. There's a whole lot of athleticism. I'm seeing that more and more. We're just very explosive inside of that room. Now let's talk about our defensive line. Wasn't a whole lot to see today. I think we kind of covered it in the video earlier that we've got some great bodies. People are kind of maintaining weight. They look fresh. They look like they're sharp and that they are ready to rock and roll. Who's going to be the starting four that rolls out there in game one is probably going to be my biggest question. I don't know. I'll tell you this. Tyree Weathersby looked extremely explosive. I would love to see him at the strong side DN starting, but Jason Jenkins looks good. Dominic Bailey and Tyree West also look good. So just really, really deep there. Now let's talk about our secondary, because we did touch on them some, but let's talk a little bit more about what we saw today. It looks like we're just kind of working through some zone coverage, working on passing off things. And it does sound like the coaches, especially Coach Banks, was given a whole lot of time to Boo Carter and also to Will Brooks. So again, they're probably going to be trying to work Will Brooks into the star rotation, but it also sounds like, hey, man, maybe they feel like Boo Carter could be the best option at star from an athletic perspective, and they're just trying to bring him along mentally. So those are my takeaways with the secondary. All right, now let's talk about that running back room. My biggest takeaway was watching them go through that handoff drill where we're typically punching at the football. We're punching more at their feet. And as we talked about in the highlights from earlier today, that's probably because they were getting tripped up in the scrimmage on Saturday. And that's one thing that I can't stand to see. I mean, especially if there's some space for the running backs to run. Pick your doggone feet up, especially at the line of scrimmage, and get through the hole first. So any little detail that we had to get ironed out with them, I think that they'll pick it up pretty quickly just because we've got some great athletes inside of that room, and we're going to be fine moving forward. The one thing that I will say, and it's not necessarily something that I saw in the practice clips today, but I saw it from a clip coming from the scrimmage on Friday that Deshaun Bishop was kind of getting pushed back on a blitz, and I believe that it was Jalen Smith that was blitzing. He kind of got blown up there some. So we do still have to work on, how to block. Now, I will tell y'all this. I think that part of the reason for that is in a game, he's going to go low, but you don't go, and at him, I'm talking about Deshaun Bishop. He'll go low on that blitz and linebacker, but you're not going to do that to your own teammates, right? Because you don't want to injure anybody. So I think that that's part of it. Obviously, with him being a smaller back, that's what he's going to have to do. He's going to have to go low 9 times out of 10. But that's the only thing that I will say about that. Now, let's move on to the wide receivers, quarterbacks, and tight ends. Didn't really see anything from the tight ends first and foremost, but I will say that they looked good in our scrimmage on Saturday. I did see it was one play that Miles Kitselman caught a touchdown pass. I believe it was from Nico, and he had James Pierce covering him underneath. And I'll say this really quickly. I know that we're not talking about this group right now. James Pierce should not be covering anyone down the field that far in a real situation. Now, of course, in practice, you want to see how he looks doing it, and I think that he can do it, but there's no reason to take away the best pass rusher in the entire country, away from what he's good at. Let him rush the doggone passers. So hoping that we'll see a whole lot of that in the season. But as far as what I saw from the quarterbacks, right, they looked really good, really sharp. Nico bounced back from the previous practice where he looked way off. Now he was way sharper, and it does sound like there was only one ball that hit the ground that did come from bruise drop. But, that is going to happen. Sometimes you will drop passes, and there's nothing to be concerned about. Outside of that, I think that Chris Brazo has looked good. Didn't really get to see him much in practice, but man, there is one clip of him again from that scrimmage. That dude, I mean, he is absolutely unreal. He's going to be a big-time red zone threat for us. But, I'm happy to see Mike Matthews back out there kind of working through everything. Looks like he's fully healthy. I think that Caleb Webb is looking sharp. Also, Chaz Nimrod, he looks very, very confident. Watch out for him. Squirrel White made a good catch. So, yeah, that room's going to be just fine. I think all of our rooms, we're really, really deep. And like I always say, this is going to be a very special season. So, y'all get ready for a heck of a year. But that's it for this one. Y'all leave y'all's thoughts down in the comments section. And as always, thank you for sticking all the way to the end. Please make sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, share with your friends, family, and all of our Volunteer fans. We'll see y'all in the next one. Thanks. Peace.